The dojo smelled of fresh mats and sandalwood incense, a calmness filling the air as students lined up in their crisp white uniforms. It was a typical evening class. Parents chatted in the corner, teenagers warmed up with practiced kicks, but all of that shifted the moment the door creaked open. A man stepped in hesitantly, his frame thin beneath a ragged coat. His shoes were so worn that the soles flapped slightly with each step, and his hair was unkempt as though it hadn't seen a brush in weeks. A few of the students noticed him first, whispering and smirking. "Is he lost?" one of the teens muttered under his breath. The man lowered his eyes, as if he'd heard, and cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said softly, his voice gravelly but calm. I was wondering if I could watch the class." Sensei Yamada, the stern-faced instructor in his 40s, raised an eyebrow and approached. "This is a private session, sir. We don't usually allow spectators." The man nodded quickly, his hands tightening around the strap of the tattered backpack slung over his shoulder. "I understand. I used to train a little, long ago. I just wanted to feel that spirit again." There was a pause. Yamada studied him for a moment before sighing. "Fine. Sit over there. Don't interrupt." The man bowed deeply, gratitude flashing in his eyes, and moved to a corner where he sat cross-legged, his thin hands resting on his knees. As the class began its warm-ups, his gaze followed every movement intently, his eyes sharp despite the lines of hardship etched into his face. When a young boy failed to break a practice board, the man whispered almost unconsciously, "Wrong angle, too much shoulder." Unfortunately, one of the students heard him and snickered. "What's that, old man? You think you can do better?" The others turned to look, their laughter growing louder. Yamada shot them a sharp glare but then turned his attention back to the man. "Do you think you can?" The homeless man froze, his pride and fear clashing in his chest. Slowly, he pulled off his ragged coat, revealing wiry muscles hardened by years of survival. He stepped forward, barefoot and calm. "May I?" he asked. The air in the dojo grew thick as the man stepped onto the mat, his bare feet making soft sounds against the polished surface. Students watched with wide eyes, some snickering behind their hands, while others looked on in curiosity. "Sir, this isn't a game," Sensei Yamada said firmly, folding his arms. "Even for a demonstration, you risk injuring yourself." The man gave a small nod, his face calm yet determined. "I understand," he said softly. "Just one chance. That's all I ask." A murmur rippled through the room as one of the older students handed him a wooden board. "This should be fun," the boy muttered under his breath. The man took the board and held it in his hands, examining the grain with a practiced eye, his fingers tracing invisible lines as though reading its story. He inhaled deeply, his chest rising and falling in a slow rhythm, and then placed the board between two supports. "Don't hurt yourself, old man," one of the teenagers called out mockingly, but the man ignored him. He closed his eyes, centering himself, as if the noise around him had faded into silence. His body stilled, his hand hovering just above the wood. Then, in one swift motion, his palm came down with blinding speed and precision. Crack! The board split cleanly in two, the sharp sound reverberating across the dojo like a clap of thunder. Gasps escaped the students, their smirks wiped clean in an instant. One boy stammered, that was luck, but his voice trembled. Sensei Yamada's eyes narrowed, not with anger but with intrigue. He had seen thousands of strikes in his career, but this one wasn't sloppy or hesitant, it was textbook perfect. "Where did you learn that?" Yamada asked, his voice low. The man straightened slowly, his expression unreadable. "A long time ago," he replied. "Before I lost my way." The dojo was silent, the students exchanging uneasy glances. For the first time, the man didn't look like a drifter or an outsider. He looked like someone who belonged. The next evening, the dojo was more crowded than usual. Word had spread about the homeless man who had split a board with a single strike, and curious faces pressed against the windows to catch a glimpse of him. "Daniel," he had quietly introduced himself as such before class began, stood in a corner, his tattered coat folded neatly beside him, his calloused hands resting on his knees as he watched the students practice. But tonight, he didn't just want to watch. "Sensei," he said after the warm-ups, his deep voice calm but resolute. "May I try something more challenging?" Sensei Yamada, arms folded across his chest, studied the man for a long moment. "What do you have in mind?" Daniel's eyes shifted to the stack of cement blocks in the corner. "The breaking test," he said. A ripple of surprise passed through the students. The breaking test was reserved for advanced practitioners, students who had spent years conditioning their hands and honing their technique. A teenage boy scoffed. "That test is for black belts, not drifters off the street." Another added with a smirk, "Bet he breaks his hand." Daniel didn't flinch at their words. Instead, he stepped forward with quiet confidence. Sensei Yamada gave a slight nod. "If you insist, we'll let you try. But understand, this isn't a board. You could injure yourself severely." "I've been hurt before," Daniel said softly, his eyes distant for a moment. "This won't be the worst pain I've felt." The students watched as the blocks were set up, 3 thick slabs stacked together. Daniel removed his worn shoes and positioned himself before them, his posture precise and deliberate. He inhaled deeply, shutting out the whispers and doubts that swirled around him. Then, in one fluid motion, his hand came down like lightning. Crack! The sound echoed through the dojo as all 3 blocks split cleanly, fragments scattering across the mat. The room went utterly silent. Even the students who had mocked him earlier were frozen, their mouths slightly agape. Sensei Yamada stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" he asked softly. Daniel stood slowly, brushing cement dust from his hand. "Once, I was a national karate champion," he said. "But life hit harder than any opponent ever could. By the end of the week, the dojo felt different. The air was thicker with anticipation, and people crowded into the small space, some standing on tiptoe to see over shoulders. News of the homeless man, Daniel Cole, had spread like wildfire after he split 3 cement slabs cleanly with a single strike. Now he stood barefoot in the center of the mat, calm amidst the buzz of voices and camera flashes. "What do you want to do this time?" Sensei Yamada asked, his tone a mix of caution and curiosity. Daniel's eyes moved to the corner, where a daunting stack of cement slabs towered over the students. "I want to attempt the dojo's record," he said firmly. A hush swept through the crowd. 10 slabs. No one had succeeded in years, not even seasoned black belts. A senior student stepped forward, frowning. "That's insane. Even if you were a champion once, you'll destroy your hand." Daniel's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "Life already broke me once. This can't hurt more than that." Slowly, the blocks were stacked, each one heavy and unforgiving. The crowd held its breath as Daniel approached, his ragged clothes replaced now by a borrowed GI that fit him perfectly but carried an air of respect. He crouched slightly, his fingers brushing the mat, and closed his eyes. The murmurs faded as he inhaled deeply, centering himself, drawing power from a place beyond muscle and bone. Then, without warning, his hands sliced down in a single, explosive motion. Boom! A deafening crack filled the air as dust and fragments burst outward like a shockwave. When the dust settled, all 10 slabs lay shattered, broken cleanly from top to bottom. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a thunderous cheer erupted from the students and onlookers, some leaping to their feet. Cameras flashed wildly. Sensei Yamada exhaled sharply, his face breaking into a rare, genuine smile. "You didn't just break the record," he said, bowing low. "You shattered it." But amidst the cheers and applause, Daniel stood still, his expression calm as if the accomplishment didn't belong to him. A reporter thrust a microphone in his face. "Sir, the world wants to know, who are you? How did you end up here?" Daniel looked down at his hands, calloused and scarred from years of hardship, and spoke quietly. "My name is Daniel Cole. I used to be a karate champion, traveled the world, won medals. But after my wife passed, I I lost everything. I lost myself. His voice wavered slightly, but he steadied it. Karate was the only thing that kept my spirit alive when I had nothing else. I slept under bridges and begged for food, but every morning, I still practiced, because karate isn't just about fighting. It's about rising, no matter how many times you've fallen. A hush swept over the dojo as his words settled into every heart like stones dropped into still water. Sensei Yamada stepped forward and bowed deeply. Daniel-san, you are no student here. You are a master. Would you honor us by teaching? For a moment, Daniel seemed taken aback. Then he smiled, a real smile that softened the hardness in his features. I will, he said gently, but only if it's free. I want to teach the ones like me, the ones who've been counted out. From that day on, the dojo became a place not just for students but for the forgotten, veterans, orphans, the homeless, all welcomed and taught by a man who had nothing yet gave everything. And though Daniel Cole never sought fame, his story would spread far beyond those walls, inspiring thousands to believe in second chances.